Spring training, yay, we made it, and let's hope the snow is done for the year. I want to shift into gears into spring and spring training, and the first person that came to my mind was Ray Sinibaldi, because we had him here last fall and had such an amazing talk on baseball, the history of the Red Sox, and his new book on Fenway Park just came out. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about Ray. Cool. And I'm going to let you give your intro.
Sure, I can do my spiel.
Who you
The first
are.
few things is about my spiel. But,
all right. Well, thank you, Ray.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, folks. Thanks for coming. We are 6 days away from opening day, believe it or not. Don't look outside to find out that's going to happen, but we'll see how it goes. If it makes you feel any better, it was actually chilly in Florida last week a little bit. 47 in the morning, and it only got up to like 63, so there were a lot of whining and crying going on down there for all the golfers. This is kind of this is an exciting. I'm very excited about this particular project because, and I'm going to tell you, there is probably maybe between 90 and 100 photographs regarding Fenway Park and the Red Sox that you will have not seen anywhere, that have never been published before. And the reason is really quite simply. That they wanted it from 1967 forward. Well, I've spent a little time at Fenway Park throughout the years, and I never realized how much time I had spent there. And I ended up having a lot of very, very cool and relevant photographs that I was able to use that I actually took, which was pretty exciting. And then on top of that, I went and I found fans. I found fans who basically went and clicked on and so kind of they gave me Fenway Park through their eyes. So there are many photographs in the book. There's probably about 200 of them in there, but like I said, almost half of them had never been published before. So that was really a lot of fun for me to get people who were just so willing to say, yeah, take it, use it. Sure, it was great. But this is obviously the front and the back cover, which is kind of a specifically significant to me for a number of reasons. This photograph was taken by a very good friend of mine who will appear in the book again, but this is the night that Jim Rice's number was retired at Fenway Park. It was in July of 2009, and we'll talk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the numbers that hang from the facade, the hows and the whys, and how that's all changed throughout the years. So that was pretty cool. And then this is a photograph that I took. This is David Ortiz's last game at Fenway in the regular season. It was the last scheduled game because they didn't have the, they didn't have the play. They had to play the playoffs, which also he played in. But this was the last, kind of like the goodbye game to Ortiz, where they rolled out the red carpet and Yaz and Rice came out, and it was pretty eventful. And I really liked all this stuff that they did. And then this is actually my daughter when she was 6. I think it's one of her first trips to Fenway. I forgot I had it. It was fun going through all the things. Ooh, I could use this one. That's my caboose. This is just a photo I took outside on Yorkie Way. And this one is actually pretty cool. And I don't know if you can see this. You can see it on the back of the book. This is Yaz doffing his cap. And he's doffing his cap, and it's when he retired in 1983, they had a weekend for him. They didn't have a day. They had Yaz weekend. Yaz Day was on Saturday, and then, of course, his last game was on Sunday. Well, on Saturday, it was the day that they gave him all the gifts, and they talked about him on the field, and his family was out there, and they did all that stuff. But the funny thing about this is, there's a very famous photographer. His name is Beerley is his name, and there's a very, very famous black and white photo that circulates, part of the Beerley collection. And it's him doffing his cap, and this is his first at-bat on the Saturday. Well, the funny part about that was I was down the third baseline, and I was watching the game, and I took a photograph, the exact same photograph as Beerley did, except it was probably 2 seconds, 3 seconds earlier, or 3 seconds later. The cool thing about it is, when they made the Yes statue, the sculptor decided that he wanted to go with the Doc cap. So I tell my kids, I said, that's my photo. I said, it was this. And of course, Tony knew nothing about that, but it was a Bailey question. So that was pretty cool. But anyway, let me just tell you, I'll give you a little bit of my story. Let me see here. Hope we can do this, Sharon. There we go. My story actually begins in prison. And I was in graduate school in the early 1990s. That's me when I had hair and things. It was a different color. Obviously, this is at Fenway when the net was just up there. This was taken in 1996. And I met these two guys, and we were working the midnight to 8 shift. And in the midnight to 8 shift in prison, there's not a whole lot going on. But we talked a lot about baseball, and what I found was I found two baseball soulmates. And we yacked and we yacked and we yacked, and during the 3 years that we yacked, we talked. One of our favorite topics was Babe Ruth. And so we kind of decided that we were going to write a book. And we researched every single game that Babe Ruth played with the Red Sox from 1914 till he left in 1919. And it turned into what was called the Babe and Red Stockings. So this is my friend Kerry. And this is David Hickey, and this kid became my son-in-law. Life works very weird things. And I think I liked him better when he was just my pal. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, so then this was the Babe and Red Stockings. Some of the nicknames that they called Babe Ruth before they called him the Bambino. You would read all these things there were 11 newspapers in Boston at the time, 11. And the Boston Post is the one that we use, which is now long gone. It was very cool. The eloquence of sports writers in those times describing things with words was just remarkable. But they referred to him as the Colossus, the Mauler, the Caveman, and of course, Babe. Well, that was 1997, and I was going about my business and teaching school and raising kids and running around like all you parents do with taking your kids here and there and everywhere. And then coming about 2011, David called me, and he said, listen, he said, the 100th birthday of Fenway is coming up. Why don't we, and he had written an Arcadia book on his hometown of Whitman, Massachusetts. And anyway, he said, why don't we do a book about Fenway? I said, I'm in. And Kerry said, I'm in. So we went back to, now we went and buried ourselves in the Boston Public Library and found all these great old photographs. And that was the project. The interesting thing was, David called his contact at Arcadia, and she said to him, I just left an acquisition meeting, and they're asking us why we don't have a book about Fenway Park. We called, there was a message waiting for her. She called David back. So God protects the innocents and the fools. There's no doubt about that. So anyway, after that came a series of things for me. Next up was a book I think I did on spring training. Click. I live in Venice, Florida. I moved there 1 week after the ball went through Bill Buckner's legs in 1986. I live in a little place called Venice, which is just short of Sarasota. And when I went there, the Red Sox trained in Sarasota from 1933 to 1958. And as I was living there, I have a penchant for old wire photos. I collect a lot. I have a lot of old baseball wire photos. And I started a collection of the Red Sox training in Sarasota. Well, that led to the book on the history of spring training in those two communities. Bradenton, Florida still has the oldest, still functioning, well, they changed the name. It wasn't McKechnie Field, but they changed because somebody gave them more money. But they have the oldest still functioning operating spring training facility in the country. It opened up in 1923. Sarasota opened up in 1924. They have since moved to a different stadium. But that was a lot of fun. And the fun part about that was I had a guy call me from the Tampa Bay Rays, a producer who does their pregame shows, and he was doing something on the history of spring training. They run it, they run it throughout the season. Last year they ran it, and they had a couple of blips of me, and I never saw it because every time I went to find it, I never saw it. But this, my son sent this to me with a text message: "Get off my TV screen." That was his son. So he was very proud of his dad. It worked out real well. So after that, I was going crazy. Next up came 2000, and the next year came this one. I was 14 years old this day. Those of you who were here, Big Ben was here last time I was here, and I talked about the '67 book. This was I was at this game And I've been collecting things about the 1967 season since then. And I stumbled across, I would troll eBay every once in a while, and I stumbled across about 450 black and white negative strips, the old 35 millimeter negative strips. And I said, this was bad, because I went into the rabbit hole, as my son says. I jumped in the rabbit hole, and they were all, some of them, they had the dates on them. Most of them didn't, so I became a history detective. And I would look for some little thing on the scoreboard or something where I could delineate what was happening in the photographs. And that turned into to this, which was just a ton of fun. And then next up came, of course, the Red Sox 1975 American League champions. So one just kind of followed another. I basically, this became my, I was a junkie. I just became a complete junkie. And had a great time. Had a great time doing it. 1975, I was in my third year as a season ticket holder. So I got to go to both of the playoff games that were at Fenway in 75. And then I went to 3 out of the 4 World Series games, including Game 6. And there'll be more on that later. And then came, I don't know what came, oh yeah, then came the green one. I coached baseball. Larry had JetBlue. I was talking about JetBlue. And this was pretty cool. This is the head coach at the place where I coach. He's a 20 years there, built quite a program that I'm proud to be associated with. I'm just a little schlepper assistant coach who gets to throw some BP and knock some ground balls and fly balls at kids. And we have a great time. He's also very, very successful. And from 2013, 14, 15, and 16, the Red Sox signed a contract with the Florida High School Athletic Association, and all of the playoff games were played at JetBlue. So the Final Four, as it were, so the semifinal games and the state championship games were all played there. We were fortunate enough to be good enough at that time that we actually went there for all 4 years, and won it twice. We went 2-2 while we were there. So anyway, this is one of our, this is guys making a catch. And out here you see it's a replica. If you haven't been there, it's an absolute exact replica of Fenway Park. And the actual cool thing is that the scoreboard there, that's at JetBlue, the metal scoreboard, is actually the scoreboard that was at Fenway Park, and it was removed following the 1975 season. I think I'll talk about that because there's another photo of that when we get there. Then came this one, which just came out last spring. I kind of switched gears. I was a history teacher for 25, 26 years, and as I was coming up on retirement, I was kind of reflecting on, I was 10 years old when the president was assassinated, and I was reflecting on my life and how the role that he played, and it was really amazing to me when I realized that he is the reason for my interest in history. He was the reason that I became a history teacher. It was really a driving force in my life. So I decided I wanted to write about President Kennedy. So I did. And then I went back to baseball, which is now where we are today. The magic of Fenway Park. I was saying to Larry earlier, it is amazing to me what this ownership has done with the ballpark. I can remember, actually in 1967, in June of 1967, Tom Yawkey, there were articles appearing in all the local newspapers and in the Boston papers that Tom Yawkey was talking about moving the Red Sox. That Fenway Park was a decrepit old ballpark. He needed a new ballpark. If the city was not going to help him, that he in fact was he was considering moving the Red Sox out of the city. Now you can imagine, that's June 1967. The Red Sox had been bad for a big chunk of time. They really hadn't been in a pennant race, a real pennant race, since 1950, and they really hadn't even been very good. I mean, they were horrible in 64, they were horrible in 65. You're looking at 90 plus losses, including 100 losses in one of those years. So now in 1967, they really weren't, they're kind of good. They're young, they're exciting. Well, they end up winning the pennant in 1967, and that is why you hear them talking about the 1967 team is the foundation upon which Red Sox Nation was built. And these are the guys, they saved baseball in Boston, because after that, they had no problem getting folks to the ballpark. They drew over 1 million fans that year, which they hadn't done since, I want to say, back maybe in the early 50s. And they haven't drawn even close to less than, I mean, the attendance now, it's crazy. I mean, they've tapped over the 3 million mark a couple of times. And as I was saying to Larry, that really the Fenway Park experience has almost overtaken baseball. I mean, it's the actual experience of being and going to Fenway has become a prominent thing for all folks who go there, as opposed to old knuckleheads like me who I wouldn't care if they just played organ music and played baseball. But I realize I'm a dinosaur and I'm on my way out the door. I get it. But anyway, these are also, you'll notice the banners on Yorkie Way. I love that. I love what they've done to it. They've turned it into a museum. They took over when they bought the team in 2000. And everybody, there was the Save the Fenway organizations. There was Tear It Down, and they were going down by the waterfront. They were going to put the Patriots down there, and Billy Bulger wouldn't let it happen, and all this kind of stuff. But it was an ongoing debate, an ongoing battle. Well, when these guys got there, they hired Janet Marie Smith. Janet Marie Smith had built Camden Yards in Baltimore. She was the architect that designed that. And she, in fact, made a huge impact on baseball, because Camden Yards was the first ballpark that was built brand new, but built with the attributes and the charm of the older ballparks. I mean, if you go to Camden Yards, there are parts of it that were modeled after Fenway. There are parts of it that were modeled after Old Crosley Field in Cincinnati. So she really had a great eye for taking modern and incorporating the old-time stuff. So they hired her, and they found out something very interesting. They always thought that you couldn't go up in Fenway Park. But when they finally found the old designs, the architectural plans and everything else, they found that Fenway Park was actually built to be able to go up. They found that the pylons had really been driven pretty deep in the ground, which is pretty amazing because they built that thing. They broke ground in November of 1911, and they were playing there in April of 1912. That's pretty crazy. But anyway, and you'll note here, all the red banners outside of Fenway Park denote World Championships. Those are when they won the World Series. Okay? Blue banners are when they won the American League pennant. And there is a white banner, and I'll talk about that at the end. Okay? And this is 1914. I really love this photo. I love the old wagon right here. I have an affinity for this because my grandpa, when he came from Italy, he was a teamster. And I said to my father, back in the day, I said, was he a criminal? The teamsters of the 60s, when I was growing up, they had Jimmy Hoffa and all that kind of, he said, no, a teamster's just a guy it was a horse. So, and he was a delivery guy. My grandpa used to deliver groceries. I don't know if that's him. It could well be. But anyway, this is 1914. It's during the World Series. The Red Sox did not play in the 1914 World Series. The Boston Braves did, because Fenway was brand spanking new, and they were getting rid of their park. The Braves actually moved into Boston, to Fenway Park, in September of 1914. 1914 are called the Miracle Braves, because they said, the Miracle Braves, they were in last place on July 4th, and they ended up winning the National League pennant, ended up winning the World Series. And they said it was a miracle. Well, the miracle was they moved into Fenway in September, and their record was like 19-3, and they just went on and won the whole deal in the World Series. Next up, Jared. So, these are when they were fledglings. This is the first team. In the middle of that is a guy by the name of Cy Young. You might have heard of him. They have an award after him every year for the best pitcher in each league. Started in the early 1960s. This was taken in a studio in Maryland, but this is the original Red Sox team in 1901. And this is the 1903 World Series winners. First World Series that was ever played, the Red Sox won it. And this is behind this is Huntington Avenue. This is behind the stands, and they're singing the Royal Rooters, a guy by the name of Ned Nuff said McGreevy, who owned a saloon near the Huntington Avenue Park called Third Base, because the last stop before home was third base. There's a lot of guys there that used to drink a lot of whiskey, and they would argue about baseball and this one and that one and who's better. And he was kind of a tough little Irishman, and the argument always ended with him slamming his hand on the bar and going, "Nuff said," and that was the end of the argument. So he was kind of his own bouncer, if you will. So this is the early years before Fenway. Next up, okay, this was kind of fun for me. This is 1912, and this is, if you note the angles here, and I ended up doing the first chapter of the book where I did kind of a then and now thing. I found old photos, and I found similar photos of the now to kind of match them up. And this is, and I did this strictly by accident. This was when Notre Dame played Boston College in the football game. I believe it was 2015. I had never seen a football game at Fenway Park. I had never got there when the Patriots were playing there in the 60s. And after they left, there was no football at Fenway Park until now. basically. But you can see this is there are a couple of workmen here. This is the original left field wall. It's a 25-foot wooden structure. You see the bleachers there. What you really can't see there, though, is there was a hill. They kind of went uphill. Interestingly enough, if you watch the new Houston Astros Stadium, in center field, you'll watch them run the ball down, and there is an incline going up the hill. That is modeled after what came to be known as Duffy's Cliff. Duffy Lewis was the left fielder for the Red Sox at this time. He became very adept at being able to judge the fact that he was running uphill to grab fly balls. So they called it Duffy's Cliff. This was taken, when I realized, when I looked at all my photographs that I had taken the night of the football game, I said, I'm sitting almost in the same place this guy was sitting, whoever the heck he was. I think his name was Bain, who was taking pictures of each of the flags. Obviously, this is the wall, but this is the same corner that you're looking at right here. So that's 1912, that's 2015. A lot of similarities, a little bit of differences. Did you have a question, Ben?
I actually knew that Fenway Park was built the same week the Titanic sunk.
That's exactly true. You're absolutely right. That's absolutely right. The same, yeah, within days. Titanic sunk on, I think, April 14th or 15th, right? And they played on the 20th. And they were, yep, the Titanic was, there was something in the newspaper about the Titanic sinking in the newspaper every day, at least on one page, for about 6 weeks afterwards. Crazy time. Okay, next up. Oh, hello. Talking about football. Up and through the early days of Fenway Park, the second most use gotten out of the field was for football, predominantly high school football, which was pretty amazing. The last time, there were 49 games played in 1934 alone. 49 high school football games were played at Fenway Park in the year in 1934. The last one was played in 1935, October. South Boston High School beat Brighton High School 14-0. There was not a high school game played again until Thanksgiving Day 2015. A high school football game played. And again, this is one of the things I like about the ownership. They go back and they kind of retouch with the roots. So I went into on Thanksgiving morning. I went into the high school football game, and interestingly enough, it was Needham and Wellesley, the oldest high school football rivalry in the country. They've been playing each other since 1888. So I sat around, I watched the game a little bit, and I happened to mosey on down. And again, God protects the innocents and the fools. And I just had my camera, and I was sitting down, and I noticed that Needham is charging into they're kind of working their way down to my end of the field. So I just paused, and I just took out my camera, and I happened to snag this shot of the kid catching a touchdown pass, and they ended up winning the game, which was pretty cool. But anyway, so yeah, this is I'm not sure, there was no dates attached to this, but this is a high school football game at Fenway, and this might even, I think it comes from, I want to say like even the teens maybe. It might even be like that far back. Next up, here we go. 1912, when they opened up Fenway, the Red Sox had their greatest season ever. To this day, they've never won more games in a season. They won 105 games that year, and it's still a team record. And they were led on the mound by this guy, who was Smokey Joe Wood. Smokey Joe Wood probably, Walter Johnson said that he threw the ball harder than anybody had ever seen. Walter Johnson was known as the Big Train, but he ended up with an arm injury, and he never made. He's in the Red Sox Hall of Fame, but he ended up he had hurt his arm so bad pitching, he ended up going to the Cleveland Indians and being an outfielder, and he was pretty good as an outfielder. But anyway, he had a 34-5 record in 1912. Anybody familiar with the stat known as WAR, W-A-R? Have you heard of that, Ben? WAR. It's an interesting new stat, and it's become, old timers really don't, we don't, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it. But it is basically, it's an evaluating tool, and they evaluate how the team did with that particular player in the lineup, as opposed to if they had a replacement player. So that would be like somebody else coming off the bench. So WAR, W-A-R, means wins above replacement. It was started by Saber geeks who were in their cellar coming up with all these numbers, Bill James predominantly, who is now a consultant with the Red Sox and has absolutely radicalized baseball. Because WAR is now used in contract negotiations. And basically, if you have a WAR, a wins above replacement, that's about like in the 5 range, you're an all-star. That's like an all-star caliber season. You get up in the 7 and 8 range, you're talking an MVP season. You get higher in the double-digit ranges, and it's crazy. It's dominance. It's dominant. Well, Joe Wood had an 11.7 WAR in 1912. WAR has a tendency to be a little bit higher for pitches because you're only comparing them to like 4 or 5 guys in a rotation, as opposed to all the guys in the lineup. They're in the everyday lineup. Very unusual for an everyday player to reach a WAR that hits in double digits. The Red Sox have had 4 guys, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But anyway, so I went a then and a now, and of course this guy came on the scene in 1999, which was, I mean, you don't have to say anything, all I have to say is Pedro. And we all know. But him in 1999 and in 2000, he had, he was 23-4. He had 313 strikeouts, and he was the first pitcher in history that year to have 300-plus strikeouts and walk less than 50 guys. So the strikeout to walk thing was just crazy. He had that kind of control. So, and then next up we're going to have David Ortiz, who wasn't bad, and this guy by the name of Tris Speaker. In 1912, these were his numbers. He was the MVP. First time they actually had, they called it the Chalmers Award. Chalmers was like an automobile company, so he got a car. This is where the tradition of the guys getting a car comes from. But they actually had it. He was the first American League MVP. Not bad. He had 383, 10 homers. They didn't hit a lot of home runs that year. 101 years later, David Ortiz had, without question, the greatest offensive World Series in the history of the game. What he did in 2013, he just kind of said, "Get on my back, because here we go." And that was the most ridiculous display I've ever seen in my life. Anyway, he had 688. There was one guy who had a higher batting average in the World Series. His name was Billy Hatcher with the Cincinnati Reds in the early 90s. But he didn't have near the production that Ortiz did. Just an absolutely remarkable series. And anyway, this is kind of cool. A friend of mine took this photograph, and what was cool, but that's the late, great John Farrell, who actually just signed a contract with the Cincinnati Reds. Next up, this guy. Not bad. Not a bad player. The Babe, the Mauler, the Colossus, all of that stuff. Without question, when you look at his numbers, you have some fun with that. There's nobody that comes close. Barry Bonds cheated his way to be almost as good as Babe Ruth. I mean, that's basically all I can tell you. But Bonds' numbers, they were talking about it. Oh, he's comparable to Babe Ruth. He was, but he was also juiced out of his mind. So he was doing on steroids what Babe Ruth was doing on beer and hot dogs. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think those are performance enhancers. I'm just saying. But anyway, on the 100th anniversary of Babe Ruth's debut in Major League Baseball, which was July 11th, 1914, he pitched and beat the Cleveland Indians 5-3. And on the 100th anniversary of that, this is Babe's granddaughter, Linda Ruth Tassetti, who actually wrote the foreword for our Babe Ruth book. And I got to meet her, and we actually did a couple of book signings together. She was a remarkably wonderful lady, and we kind of stay in touch. Well, this is her with Wally. This is her husband, and she threw out the first pitch and they gave her the jersey. They put Babe's name on the back with 100. So it was a century ago, and to this day, I contend, and I fight with my son about this all the time, there's nobody better. What he did, it's just remarkable. People would stop and watch. If he hit fly balls higher than anybody had ever seen it. He hit balls longer than anybody had ever seen it. But there were people, he would pop up, and there would be articles about it in the newspaper. And he hit a pop-up fly ball farther and higher than anybody had ever seen a pop-up go before. And that's pretty remarkable. You know, if they're talking about your pop-ups, you got to be doing something. 1918. The Red Sox in 1918 won their 5th World Series. I think 5th. They won it. They won the first one in 03. There was no World Series in 1904, although the Red Sox won the American League pennant that year. There was no World Series because John McGraw, who was like the name in baseball, the manager of the New York Giants, refused to let his National League team play against those upstart American Leaguers. The American League was only in its third year. So there was no World Series in 1904. But then the Red Sox won it in 12, they won it in 15, they won it in 16, and they won it in 18. So by 1918, they had won their 5th World Series. They were the most dominant team. They were the first dynasty, actually, in the American League. And then they sold Babe Ruth. Sold Babe Ruth for $125,000 and a $350,000 mortgage on Fenway Park. So in reality, Jake Rupert of the New York Yankees, not only did he own Babe Ruth, but he also owned Fenway Park as well. And there's no way that that would happen today. There's no way that the league would allow that to happen today. But it's kind of interesting, and that began what Dan Shaughnessy called the curse. But I'll get into that as we go and how that all sort of played itself out when we talk about the rivalry. These are, again, part of the museum. You can see they put the retired numbers on the wall. That is on Van Ness Street, heading down to the gates where the statues now are. And basically what these are all guys who played for the Red Sox a significant amount of time and then went into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. So you have guys who are in the Hall of Fame, not necessarily as Red Sox players, like Babe Ruth, but they recognize the contributions that he made. Yes, sir.
I actually read a book, Babe Ruth and the Baseball Curse.
Yes.
And it said, it was against the Yankees, the bloody sock game.
Oh, yes, sir. One of my favorites.
And Kurt Schilling,
Nice.
I was surprised he didn't get replaced.
Really? I know, he did a good job, didn't he? Mm-hmm. That was one of the most courageous athletic performances you will ever see in your life. He literally had his thing stitched together, his little tendon in his ankle. That's tough. Okay, now by the way, you can see this is Yaz posing for my photo. God bless him. And Teddy Ballgame, and you're going to get the whole story of the Ted Williams statue today. And I guarantee you have never heard it before. This is Mr. Yockey. This is Eddie Collins. And this is Bucky Harris, manager and general manager. This is taken on the right field roof. Tom Yockey, he grew up in Detroit. He was adopted by an uncle who had lots of money. And when Uncle died, Tom Yockey became rich. There was one stipulation. He could not get the money till he was 30 years of age. When he turned 30, he got the money and he went and bought the Red Sox. The Red Sox were abysmal. When I say they were terrible, they had a stretch in the 1920s to the early 30s, like 11 years in a row, where they lost 100 games like 6 times. They were terrible. It was so bad that there was fires in the left field grandstand at Fenway Park, and Bob Quinn never even bothered to fix them because it didn't matter. Nobody was coming to the game anyway. So when Yockey bought the team, he immediately went on. He underwent some renovations, along with acquiring some pretty good baseball players. Lefty Grove was the best pitcher in baseball at the time. He traded for him. The big chunk of the trade was a lot of money. So it would be, we're going to give you Joe Blow and $150,000 for Lefty Grove. $150,000 in those days was a lot of money. So he acquired Lefty Grove. He acquired this guy, Jimmy Fox. Jimmy Fox had been an MVP for the Athletics. He had won a Triple Crown for the Athletics. Jimmy Fox was the second player to reach the 500 home run club after Babe Ruth. He was known as the Beast, and he was just cut and ripped, and this is way before lifting weights, way before anything. He was just a monster of a guy, and just a great hitter. This is Bobby Doerr, who joined the team in 1938. Bobby Doerr came up through the Red Sox farm system, joined the team in 38. And Johnny Pesky also came up through the Red Sox farm system. He joined the team in 1942. This little patch here will tell you that the year is 1939. It's the 100th anniversary patch of baseball. It was the 100th birthday of baseball, 1839 to 1939. And next up, this is the left field wall was built in 1934. This is a game on April 21st, and I had great fun with this. I found a very similar play from 1934 and from 2012. And this is basically a same deal, a first baseman flipping the ball to the pitcher covering the base. You can see the left field wall. This is the 5th game that was played at Fenway Park with the left field wall there. And as you can see, it was all advertisements, which kind of went away, and then it's kind of come back now. You know, it's kind of come back in a different one. And this is the same play. That's Mike Avila on a play, Carlos Pena flipping to the pitcher. Carlos Pena went to Northeastern University and actually played for the Red Sox for a little bit. I saw Carlos Pena hit a pinch hit home run against the White Sox one time. It was the only home run he hit for the Red Sox. And he's now an ESPN guy. MLB guy, I think, and an ESPN guy. Next up is this guy, Teddy Ballgame. This is 1939, and this is, I love this. It's hard to find a color photograph of Ted that early in his career, but I really love this photograph. You know, he's obviously completing his swing. He's a very skinny guy. He was about 6'3" and really kind of a lanky, wiry kind of kid. You know, he kind of beefed up, as we all do, as he was making his way through, but he was really kind of wiry. This photograph I absolutely love. This is Lou Gehrig, this is Joe DiMaggio, this is Memorial Day weekend at Fenway Park. This little guy here is Ted Williams, 6 weeks in the big league. And you can see him kind of just sitting looking down as Gehrig and DiMaggio make the turn, okay? Lou Gehrig's streak at this time is already over, and he is, in this photograph, less than 2 weeks away from receiving his diagnosis at the clinic in Michigan. What is it? The Leahy Clinic? Is that what it is? That he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So he's sick here, doesn't really know how sick he is, but he has already benched himself because he's the one that ultimately took himself out of the game. Because he said, I don't know what's going on with me, but I can't hit the ball. I'm not helping you. He's hitting about $110, and he just said they took him out. And then, so this is Memorial Day. Of course, in July, they had Lou Gehrig Day, when he said basically that famous thing, I might have been given a bad break, but today I feel like I'm the luckiest man in the world. So I love the historical significance in this photo. Joe DiMaggio arrived in 1936, and by 1939 is pretty widely recognized as among the best players in the league, if not the best player. And then next comes 1941. So in 1941, there's a few things going on. Ted Williams hit 406. Joe DiMaggio hit in 56 straight games. The Yankees won the pennant, surprise. And something called World War II started. But what you have here, right here in 1941, would be the birth of what's come to be known as the Red Sox-Yankee rivalry. And it didn't start as a Red Sox-Yankee rivalry, because as bad as the Red Sox were, from the curse story all tells us that it was Babe being sold to the Yankees. And that really wasn't it, because the Yankees started to become very, very good, and the Red Sox turned out to be very, very bad. But you really can't call it a rivalry if I am beating you to death every time I play you. There is no rivalry. It's a dominance. And that's essentially what was happening. The Red Sox in Yankee records, collectively, from the time Babe Ruth joined the Yankees till the time he left the Yankees in 1930, after the 34 season, are almost identical in reverse. It's like the Yankees had 853 wins and 348 losses, and the Red Sox had 353 wins and 851. It was crazy how identically reversed it was. So there was no rivalry, but this began when he hit in 56 straight games, DiMaggio did, a record that I'm fairly certain is never going to be broken. And then Williams hit 400, and he was the last player to do it. And of course, Williams' story of hitting 406 is great because he went into a doubleheader in Philadelphia, and they were playing 2 games, and he was hitting 399.6, which technically is 400. And Joe Cronin, the manager, said to him, he said, "Sit it out. You got your 400." He said, "No, I don't. I don't have 400." And the last guy to do it was a guy named Bill Terry with the Giants in like 1931. So it really wasn't even all that. It was like 10 years. That's all there was between the last 400 hitter. He said, "No, I'm playing." He played both games. He went 6 for 8, and he finished the year at 406, leaving no doubt that he was a 400 hitter. And again, interestingly enough, through the 56 straight games that Joe DiMaggio hit in, Ted Williams had a higher batting average than Joe did in those 56 games. So this is really where the rivalry began. It was our best player is Joe DiMaggio, your best player is Ted Williams, and then came 1942. I think I have 42 in here. Yes, 1942, Ted Williams wins his first Triple Crown. He would win a second. He's one of only 3 guys that won Triple Crown twice. He had 356, 36 homers, 137 RBIs, and his WAR was 10.1. Okay, he becomes the second Red Sox everyday player to hit the WAR that goes into double figures. Joe Gordon was the MVP that year for the Yankees, and these were his numbers. Clearly, the fact that the Yankees won the pennant that year has a lot to do with it. You remember, in early days, the MVP had a tendency to come off the team that finished in first place. I don't know why that is, but it just was. So Ted won his first Triple Crown, not a bad season, and then they all went off to war, about 450 of them. They all left and they all went off to war. And that brings me to the next. Then they came back, 1946. Now this is, again, when Dan Shaughnessy writes the book about the curse of the Bambino, these are the things that he cites. And he begins with first the sale of Babe Ruth, and then he goes to this. There was a very famous play in the 1946 World Series. The Red Sox left, this is game 4, and this was actually pretty cool. They played St. Louis in 2013. Well, in 2013, the Red Sox notified all season ticket holders that if they wanted to, they could take batting practice at Fenway Park. Well, I've had season tickets with my brother. There's 5 of us that kind of are in on this. My brother's the name on it, so he calls me and he says, "You want to take batting practice at Fenway Park?" I said, "The Pope Catholic? What are you kidding me?" I said, "Yeah." I said, who's pitching?" So anyway, he said, "They're doing this thing." He said, "You can go out, you just pick a time, you go out there. They got it all set up. They got the cage out there. They got a batting practice pitcher out there, and you can take 10 swings." So I jumped on a plane. I said, "I'm in." So I jumped on a plane and I came up. And this is what the left field, this was the line score, the scoreboard after they won the 2013 World Series. Well, this is game 4. They played St. Louis in that World Series. And this is the Cardinals are beating them 20-8. Pounding them, and this is just Ted Williams leaning on the scoreboard, wondering what happened that particular day. The 46 team was up 3-2 in the 46 World Series. They went back to St. Louis. They lost the 6th game. The Cardinals tied it, and then late in the 7th game, it's known as Enos Country Slaughter's Mad Dash, and Johnny Pesky wore goat horns for a long time. And what happened was it was a 3-3 game. It was the bottom half of the 8th inning. And Enos Country Slaughter was up. Dominic DiMaggio, who was their regular center fielder, got hurt. And he was replaced by a guy by the name of Leon Culberson. Ever heard of him? Yeah, not many people have. He was just like a backup center fielder. Dom DiMaggio was an outstanding defensive outfielder. And what happened was Slaughter was on first base, and Harry the Cat Keene singled into left center field. Enos Country Slaughter never, ever, ever stopped. He rounded second. He rounded third, and Culberson just kind of fielded the ball lackadaisically, threw it into Pesky. Pesky took the cutoff throw, and when he turned, Slaughter was rounding third on a mad dash. Pesky threw home. It was too late. Slaughter slid in 4-3, and that was the end of the night. The Red Sox went out in the 9th, and they lost the World Series. They were heavily favored to win that World Series. They were the best team the Red Sox had since the 1912 team. That team won 104 games. No Red Sox team has won 100 games in a year since then. But interestingly enough, when I was at the Hall of Fame with Linda Ruth Tossetti and my 2 buddies, and we were doing our book signing, I shared a table, and next to me was Enos Country Slaughter. My son was about 11 years old. He was signing photographs of him sliding into home plate to the deciding run of the 46 World Series. And my son was actually pretty cool. He was about 12. And he came up to me and said, "Dad, do you think Papa, my dad, would mind if I got him to sign this for me?" I said, "I think it'll be okay." And he still has. He doesn't keep a lot of stuff, but he still has the. And it was funny. I said to him, I said, "Enos, I said, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but you're part of a big story in Red Sox folklore." And he just turned around. He said, whatever the heck the date was, October 12th. 1946, 4:31 p.m. I mean, he knew. I said, talk about being defined by a moment. He knew his moment. It was pretty cool. I don't know if you've taken the time to walk around Fenway Park. And doing this book, I'm kind of glad I did it, because I went into a couple of games and I literally walked all around the grandstands, and it really truly is a museum. this was one of my favorite exhibits. They have an exhibit to the greatest generation. And these are the guys from World War that went off to fight in World War II. And the Red Sox had 15 guys. The other thing that was pretty cool that I came across in Discovery, up until I found this, it was kind of widely thought that there was only one photograph of John F. Kennedy ever taken at Fenway Park. And it was taken in 1947. And it's Ted Williams, Hank Greenberg, and the Red Sox player by the name of Eddie Pellegrini. They're holding a bat in the dugout. But I stumbled across another one that really was not widely known, and I had never seen it before. Doesn't mean anything except I had never seen it before. But this was pretty interesting. He's giving a ball to this guy whose name is Charles McGilvery, and you can see that he's lost his left arm. McGilvery fought at the Battle of the Bulge, and he lost his left arm. His left arm was blown off. The Battle of the Bulge was pretty cold. It was snowy. A lot of guys froze to death. And what McGilvery did is he stuck his stump in the snow, and it actually created it just kept him from bleeding to death. And anyway, he was from the Boston area. I think he was from Roslindale, and I believe there's a park named after him in Roslindale. So yeah, so that was pretty cool. This is Ted Williams' bomber flight jacket from when he was a pilot in the Korean War. I'd like to pause and talk a little bit about Earl Johnson. I'm fairly certain that you've probably never heard of Earl Johnson. He was a left-handed pitcher. And Earl Johnson, he fought at the Battle of the Bulge. He was part of the invasion of Normandy in June of 1944. So he got to do both those things. So he was part of the invasion force, then they marched across, part of the guys that marched across France, liberated France, got into Belgium and found out that the Nazis weren't quite done yet. So he fought at the Battle of the Bulge, and the Battle of the Bulge might have been the worst battle of the war, but it finally broke the back of the Nazis. And anyway, so he was part of both of those things, and he only got a bronze and a silver star. And then he came back to about a 7-year Major League career. So he was the winning pitcher in Game 1 of the 46 World Series. The 1948 playoff game. Anybody remember the 1978 playoff game? Fun, wasn't it? Yeah, it was like being at the dentist. In 1948, and again, we're looking at the beginning of the rivalry. 47, Red Sox won in 46 handily. They really ran away from it. 47, they didn't bounce back. They just had an off year. 48, the Red Sox, the Cleveland Indians, and the Yankees literally went down to the last weekend of the season. Okay, the Yankees were eliminated first, and then the Red Sox won a game. The last game of the season, the Indians lost, and now there was going to be another playoff game. Well, this is where, again, the curse starts to come in. And this curse goes to a guy by the name of Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy was the manager, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. But ultimately, what he did, Mel Parnell was a kid pitcher. I believe he might have even been a rookie in 48. He had an 8-3 record. He was 2-1 against the Indians, with an earned run average of 1.73. Fenway Park in those years was not known to be a good place to throw left-handed pitchers because the opposition would load up with right-handed hitters. The left field fence was close, a lot of home runs, so they kind of, actually Whitey Ford was one of the best left-handed pitchers for the Yankees ever. They wouldn't even pitch him at Fenway Park because as bad as the Red Sox were, they would clock him. I mean, they would definitely, they would beat him up. So they would actually bypass him at Fenway. Of course, he owned them in Yankee Stadium. I can't understand it. But anyway, so instead of going with Mel Parnell, manager Joe McCarthy chose Denny Galehouse, who was a 36-year-old journeyman pitcher. But he said he's got a gut feeling about his experience. He's a right-hander. He's been around. He was 36 years old. Well, Galehouse threw 3 innings, gave up 4 runs, and took the loss. And the Red Sox lost it was the first time there had been a playoff game in the American League. So they went, they lost. And actually, interestingly enough, 1948, the Braves won the National League pennant. So if the Red Sox had won this game, you would have had a Subway Series in Boston. It would have been the Boston Red Sox against the Boston Braves. It's the closest we ever came. And here's Broadway Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy had managed 16 seasons with the Yankees. 8 World Series, of which he won 7. Okay, he managed the Sox in 48, and he also managed the Sox in 1949. Now, 1949, we're going to add again to the curse. The Red Sox go into Yankee Stadium. There are 2 games remaining. The Red Sox are up 1 game. They just have to win 1 game in Yankee Stadium, and they're going to play in the 1949 World Series. I don't have to tell you. Saturday game, they're ahead 4-0, and they lose it 5-4 on a home run on a guy by the name of Johnny Lindell. You ever heard of Johnny Lindell? No? I never heard of him either. He hit a grand total of 72 home runs in his career. One of them was on this day, so the Red Sox lose 5-4. Now they come back and it's a one game decides it. So, Mel Parnell, okay, comes into the game in the 8th inning. The Red Sox are ahead. They're losing 1-0, and he gives up 4 runs. And they're losing 5-0. The Sox come up in the 9th. They get 3 in the 9th, and they lose 5-3. The Yankees went on to win that World Series, and the Yankees would win the World Series in 1950, 51, 52, and 53. 5 in a row, the second time that they have won 5 World Series in a row. They're the only guys to ever do it. And so, once again, cited by Dan Shaughnessy in the curse of the Bambino. They're all cursed. They can't win it. They can't get there. 1950 is really kind of the last time that there's a real pennant race, that the rivalry is kind of still alive. This is an interesting chronology. May 18th, they're tied for first place. June 18th, they're 9.5 games behind. July 18th, well, they gained a game. They're 8.5 out. August 18th, they're creeping closer, 6 out. They get hot as a pistol on September 18th, they're 1 game behind. Then they lose 4 straight, 7 out of 11. They finish in 3rd place, 4 games out. So they get there, and then they fold it up. They did have, and this would be their signature from 1950 to 1967. They would have guys that would have great years, great hitters. They'd have batting champions. They'd have rookies of the year. They'd have MVPs. They'd have all this, but they wouldn't win. They wouldn't win. So Billy Goodman was the batting champ. Walt Dropo became the first Red Sox player to win the Rookie of the Year award. Moosip, Connecticut's Walt Dropo. And then from 46 to 50 is really the beginning of the Red Sox-Yankee rivalry, as we come to know it. And it's really, as you can see, it's really 4 years where they were both good enough to battle for the top spot. Only 4 years. And this would not come to life again until the 1970s. But anyway, next up. Yeah, this is just a rundown of how bad they were in the 50s. The rivalry went to sleep. The best year they had, the highest they finished was in 3rd in 1958. That was the closest they came to the top, but significantly far behind the Yankees. Notice I didn't even have to think about it. It was the Yankees. Yeah. In 52 and 53, Ted Williams, again, lost now 2 more years. I did a little statistical analysis of Ted Williams, and based upon his home run to at-bat ratio. And I took all the years that he missed, and I figured if he had just done what he did on the average, because these were all his prime years too. I mean, this wasn't when he was an old guy or anything. That if he had and he had as many at bats, that he would have finished his career about, I want to say, 693 home runs if he just did what he had been doing, and that would have only been about 20 behind Babe Ruth at the time with 714. Jackie Jensen, truly one of the great the only guy to ever play and win in a Rose Bowl, and play and win on a World Series team. He was out of the University of Southern California, won the Rose Bowl, and then he played for the Yankees and he began his career with the Yankees. Then he went to the Senators, came to the Red Sox. Tremendous athlete, was the '58 MVP, and actually they lost Jackie Jensen to flight. He was terrified of flying, so he left. He left baseball, came back, tried it again, and by the late '50s, they were now flying everywhere instead of taking a train, and he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. He retired. Yeah, and he was a great athlete. Died relatively young too. Died in 1982. He made an appearance at a Fenway, their first old timers game in forever, and he made an appearance there. Within about 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, he passed away of a heart attack. And he was married to, I think, an Olympic skater, if I remember correctly. Sonia Heney. Does that sound familiar? Is that?
Yeah.
Help me, Larry. Sonia Heney, was she a skater?
Yes.
Wife? Did he marry her? Married somebody.
That I don't know.
Okay. Now we're getting into the late 50s, and this is where the culture starts to be changed. The Red Sox had a manager at the time, Mike Higgins, who was on your ball. Mike Higgins, sad to say, was one of the most bitter human beings and a virulent racist. And he would basically was known to say that there would never be a black man playing for the Red Sox as long as he was the manager. The Red Sox had a couple guys at that time. Earl Wilson had been signed in 1953 as a catcher. Earl Wilson actually was playing in the Red Sox minor league team in Montgomery, Alabama during the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. Earl Wilson, when throwing the ball to second base, he could not throw the ball straight to second base. His ball had so much movement from second base, it literally would tail, it would move. So they said, you can't catch, maybe you can pitch. So they put him on the mound. So he spent 5 or 6 years in the minor leagues. Pumpsy Green had a great spring training in 1958, and he had a great spring training in 1959. And really, the talk around was that he was going to go. He was probably going to be on the big club. He was going to be the first black man to play baseball for the Red Sox. Higgins sent him down. So Mike Higgins got fired in July, and about 2 weeks later, Pumpsy Green was called up. He made his debut in Chicago, Comiskey Park, in July of 1959. A week later, Earl Wilson was called up. So they both made their debuts within actually, I think it was 6 days apart in 1959. This photograph is particularly significant because this was taken the night of August 4th, 1959. That is the starting infield for the Red Sox. And this is the night that Pumpsy Green became the first black man wearing a Red Sox uniform to play in a game at Fenway Park. He led off, tripled, and scored in the first game. This is Frank Malzone. This is Don Button, who actually couldn't catch a cold. My father used to call him E6 Button because he would boot balls all over the place at shortstop. Pumpsy Green played second, and Pete Runnels was the first baseman. Pete Runnels was a pretty good hitter. He would actually go on to become an interim manager for the Red Sox at the end of one of the seasons. He won a couple of batting titles as well. Bill Monbouquet and Earl Wilson. This photograph is taken in late August of 1962. These guys threw no-hitters. Let's see, Wilson threw one on June 26th, 1962, beat the Angels at Fenway Park. I remember watching that game on TV. It was amazing because you had a weekday game on television. You guys will not understand this, but that didn't happen. You watched the game on Saturdays and Sundays, and then maybe every couple of weeks you get a night game that was on TV. Man, oh man, that was Christmas. And this night, and I remember my brother had gone to the game with a friend of his, and I was excited, but then it rained, and I thought, oh my God, you can't rain out a game that's on TV, that's awful. So I went in and I watched Earl Wilson flip the no-hitter, beat them 2-0. He hit a home run in that game. He is only one of 2 pitchers in history that have thrown a no-hitter and hit a home run in the same game. And then on August 1st in Chicago, Bill Monbouquet threw a no-hitter against the White Sox. He walked Al Smith in the second inning, and I was the only guy that got on base. And I had that plugged into my radio. And that was in August. So as bad as they were, and they were bad, but they had 2 guys throw no-hitters within 6 weeks of each other in the same season. And the funny thing was, one of my first favorite players was Pumpsy Green. One reason and one reason only. He was a switch hitter. And I just loved the fact that guys could bat from both sides of the plate. They didn't have a switch hitter on the team. That was it. They got a switch hitter. I didn't care if he was black, green, purple, striped. I didn't care. He was a switch hitter. He was my boy. He was another one of my players because he was a pitcher who hit home runs. I loved pitchers who could hit. And he hit 37 home runs, one behind Warren Spahn in the career of home runs for pitchers. So the culture began changing. Dick O'Connell was the Red Sox general manager now. Dick O'Connell had been a colonel in the United States Army, served in the Pacific Theater. He was part of the guys that planned the island invasions and the battles during World War II. He was a local guy. I think he was from Needham or Wellesley or something. But anyway, he just went to work in the minor league system, elevated. He was now in charge of the player personnel. He was making the player personnel decisions, and some nice things happened, as we'll see.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. Were you aware of the culture change as a young person? No. Did your parents talk about?
No, my dad was a huge advocate. I can remember my dad talking about like the Dr. King's March and things like that. But when it came to baseball, I had no idea that the Red Sox were the last team to integrate until I was an adult.
All right.
And like I said, when this guy, it's just amazing, but this is the mind of a 6-year-old. You know, these guys were on the team, and there's a 6-year-old, and all I know is there's a guy that can hit from both sides of the plate.
Right.
And there's a guy who pitches and hits bombs.
As it should be.
And that's exactly, that's you know, and that's just a tribute to my folks. I was totally unaware of this about anything. As I got older, and things started to unfold in the early 60s, then I became, like, I remember watching the news with Bull Connor turning the hose on the kids in Birmingham, Alabama, and I would say to them, what's going on here? What's this?
Yeah.
What the heck is this? You know, and that's when my dad would talk to me about it.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Now, this is one of the guys, he was signed out of Coleman High School, Mississippi, Mississippi in 1962. He became known as the Boomer. This guy could mash. I don't think there is anybody who ever played the game of baseball that enjoyed playing it more than this guy. Hit one of the longest home runs I've ever seen at Fenway Park. Used to call him Taters. He got traded by the Red Sox in the 70s, 1972. And he used to wear this crazy necklace that looked like they had ivory teeth in them. And they asked him, I said, Boomer, what's in the teeth? He said, what is with the necklace? He said, those are all second baseman's teeth. So, you know, I mean, he was just fun. He got out of shape a little bit, got kind of heavy. Dick Williams called him a cement head because he would just get too fat, and he would bench him. He said, you're not playing again, you're going to lose 5 pounds. And Scotty would be out there in those days to do rubber suits, and he would just be out in the outfield sweating so he could get down to weight. He was like a wrestler, just trying to get down to weight before the event. He was a rookie in 1966. He hit 27 home runs and knocked in 90 runs as a rookie in 1966, and he became the first black American player in a Red Sox uniform to make the All-Star team that year. 1967, he hit over 300, and he won a Gold Glove. He could field like crazy. He was fun. He was a fun guy, and he just died a few years ago. He died young. I think he had a heart attack. He was big. He came back, and he was with the '78 team as well. 1967, I talked about him briefly. The Cardiac Kids, led by Kyle Yastrzemski and Jim Lomborg. Kyle Yastrzemski won the Triple Crown that year. Kyle Yastrzemski's WAR in 1967 was the highest of any Red Sox player ever for an offensive player. It was 12.4 in 1967. To try to describe what Kyle Yastrzemski did in 1967 is almost impossible to do. He was everything. Dick Williams, the manager, said that if he had to take one player in one season, he said Kyle Yastrzemski was the greatest player in baseball that one season. He said he was the guy. He did it everywhere. He did it in the field. He did it on the bases. He did it with the bat, primarily with the bat. And my son asked me one time, and if you're a baseball fan, you'll understand this. He asked me how clutch he was in 1967, and I described it like this. I said, not by something that he did, but something that he didn't do. On the last day of the season that they had to win the game, he was up, the bases were loaded, the Red Sox were losing 2-0, it was in the 5th inning. And he came up to the plate. And he hit an absolute rope into left center field on a line. The ball was hit so cleanly, you almost couldn't even hear it. I mean, he hit it, he squared it up that purely. And the Red Sox scored 2 runs, and the game was tied. I was at that game. I almost fell out of the rafters because I was watching. I had crawled up a pipe, and I was literally out over the third base side with my arms wrapped around those metal girders that are out there. I'm scared of heights. I don't know what I was doing, but I was 14 and daring. I almost fell out when he got the hit, but the fact of the matter is after that happened, you kind of said, gee, I thought he'd hit a home run. You know, I mean, here he got a 2-run single to tie the game, a huge hit in a huge spot, but you actually thought he would hit a home run because that's the kind of stuff he had done all year long. You just expected the home run. So the 2-run single became like a mini disappointment. But I said to my son, I said, that's how good he was. And of course, Jim Lomborg won the Cy Young Award that year, 22-9, ferocious pitcher. He was known to nail people. There was a huge fight that he started with, he didn't start it, it was going back and forth with the Yankees in June of that year. The Yankees were terrible. The Yankees had finished in last place the year before, and they were bad in '67. but there was a huge fight, pitchers hitting guys. The Yankee pitcher hit Joe Foy in the helmet because he'd hit a grand slam the night before. And so those pitchers batted then, and he stepped into the plate. Johnny Tillison was his name, and Lomborg just drilled him right in the numbers. And then he started chirping, and then Lomborg started chirping, and then chirp, 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 chirp. And the next thing you know, and it was a Donnybrook. Rico Petrocelli and Joe Pepitone of the Yankees literally were throwing haymakers at each other. And the best part is Rico was from New York, and they had grown up together. They were buddies. They grew up like 3 houses away from each other. They were going at it. And Rico's brother was a cop, and he was out in the field breaking up the fight. He was a New York City cop. It was a crazy time. This is the lineup on 1967, first game of the World Series. And I just put this out there because of the ages. The average age of that starting lineup was 23 years old. 23, almost 24 years of age. The youngest team the Red Sox had at that time since going back to the days of Babe Ruth. They have not had a younger team since, and that's why they called them the Cardiac Kids. They called them the Cardiac Kids because they would come back. I don't even know, they had like 41 wins that they came back. They were losing, and they came back and won. And again, they had been so bad. And they asked Yastrzemski about the pressure of the pennant race. He said, pressure of the pennant race? He said, this is fun. He said, this is what, he said, pressure's when people come out to see you play and your team stinks and you go 0 for 4 and they're booing the heck out of you because they want to see something and you're supposed to be the guy. So yeah, and also, if you look closely, I'm right there.
I haven't seen
That's
it.
it. This is the skipper, Dick Williams, in 1964. He played with the Red Sox. He was a journeyman player. He was like a utility player. Played 13 years in the big leagues. His last 2 were with the Red Sox. So in 1964, he retired. The Red Sox immediately hired him, and he gave him the managing job as a AAA team. So when he got to Fenway in 1967, he had already managed a lot of these kids at AAA level. And he basically said he was only 36. So he was pretty young, but yet he was 13 years older than the average age of the guys of the basically the best starting 9. And all he said was, hey, listen, first thing he did, he said, Kyle Yastrzemski's not the captain, I'm the captain. You know, we don't need a captain. I'm in charge, we don't need a captain. He has loved it, thank you very much, he said. I don't want any part of that. And he said they won't quit. He said, nobody quitted me Toronto, nobody's going to quit me here. And then he said, I actually think they asked him for a prediction. He said, I actually think we'll win more games than they lose. That doesn't sound like such a big deal, but they were so bad. I mean, they had lost 94 games the year before. And 3 years in a row, they had lost 90-plus games. And he just said, I honestly think we'll win more than we'll lose. And he wasn't wrong. Tony Conigliaro. Tony Conigliaro may be the saddest baseball story ever. Tony Conigliaro was born in East Boston, raised in Swampscott, Massachusetts. And at the age of, he came out of St. Mary's of Lynn High School in Lynn. And he was drafted, and he went to the New York Penn League, what they call the short season league. So he was drafted in June, and then he went on and played. He immediately went up to Wellsville, and in 1964, he was the opening day right fielder at Fenway Park. So he graduated in 63, and at 19, he was the opening day fielder at Fenway Park. And his first at bat at Fenway Park, he hit a ball that went towering over the screen. Might have made it to the turnpike. I mean, just hit a ball. And that was it. Everybody was in love with Tony Conigliaro. This kid could hit. He was a fearless hitter, a great clutch hitter. He was the youngest American League player to reach 100 career home runs. He was the youngest player in the history of baseball to actually lead the league in home runs. In 1965, he had 32 home runs, the American League home run champ. And then in 1967, on August 18th, the Red Sox were playing the Angels. And ironically enough, about 2 days before then, Tony C's agent was in Lakeville, Massachusetts, where Ted Williams used to run a little baseball camp. And he had gone down there to talk to him about something or business or whatever. And Williams had said to him, he said, listen, tell Tony he's got to back off the plate. He said, they're coming at him. He said, he's got to get off the plate. He said, you've got to give the pitcher a little bit of room. He said, make sure you tell him that when you see him. Well, the night of August 18th, they were playing the Angels. Jack Hamilton was pitching. And Rico Petrocelli was in the on-deck circle. And the pitch came in, and Tony never saw it. And it hit him right here. And he went down. And Rico Petrocelli said, I've never heard anything like it in my life. He said it literally felt like a watermelon had been dropped from a third floor window and just smashed on the sidewalk. Tony went down. It ended up he had damaged his retina, so he was out for the whole '67 season. He was out for the whole '68 season, and they basically said they didn't think the vision was going to come back. Well, in 1969, he went to spring training, and he was going to try to pitch. Now, bearing in mind, he's like about 24 years old, okay, in '69. So he goes down to try to pitch, and as he's working out, he's noticing that, he said, I can kind of see stuff. He said, I don't know what's going on. So they threw to him. Well, in 1969, he ends up winning the Comeback Player of the Year award. The Red Sox now have a Tony Canigliaro award. It's about a player that overcomes adversity. So in '69, he comes back. He's very respectable. 1970, he hits 36 home runs and knocks in 116 runs, and everything is great. It's like, holy mackerel. It's just almost like it's miraculous. Well, then, following the end of the 1970 season, he started having trouble again. There was like a blind spot again. He was having trouble picking up the curveball. His average wasn't that high, but he was still hitting bombs. The Red Sox traded him to the Angels, and by the following year, it was back, and he was all done. Well, then he goes on and becomes and I think he was, at this time he's like 28 or whatever. So then he goes back. Works in Providence, Rhode Island as a sports guy on the TV, because he could do everything. He recorded songs. I mean, he was the all-American kid. He did whatever he wanted. He was a single guy. I mean, he was dating Playboy models. He was all over the place, and he was a recording star. He was on the Merv Griffin show, singing on TV. He could do it all. So anyway, he does the TV gig, and then in 1975 he's out in San Francisco, and he wants to come back. No, he was still in Rhode Island. He wanted to come back. He said he thought the vision came back a little bit. So in 1975 he goes to spring training, and he makes the team. And on opening day 1975, having not played now for 4 years, he's at Fenway Park on the opening day in '75, where Hank Aaron is making his debut with the Brewers as the designated hitter, because he had been traded by the Atlanta Braves to the Milwaukee Brewers. And so, I mean, you talk about a festive occasion at Fenway. And then he steps up and he singles his first time up. He singles in Yastrzemski, who had singled, stole second, and the place is going cuckoo. Well, by May, Tony C was done. He came back again. He didn't have it. He'd just been away too long. He's now like 34, 35, and it was just over. So he went out to San Francisco to work with a TV station out there, and he was doing sports, living out in San Francisco. And then, I want to say in the mid-'70s, no, the early '80s, he came back to Boston to interview to be the color man on old Channel 38 in Boston. And he got the job. His brother was driving him to the airport. He was flying back to San Francisco. And he was 38 years old. He had a massive coronary in the car. So his brother just drove him, instead of going to Logan Airport, he was coming from Swampscott to North Shore, drove him right to Mass General Hospital, and they brought him back, but he'd been gone for 8 minutes. And it was in the late '80s. And he basically was sort of incapacitated. He couldn't speak, he couldn't walk, and he died at the age of 45 in the early '90s, when he really should have been wrapping up a Hall of Fame baseball career. Anyway, a lot of folks now will tell you they would like to see his number 25 retired. But it was the local kid that made good. I am convinced that if Mr. Shakespeare were to just suddenly rise up from wherever it is that he is resting and watch the baseball game and said, I like this. Give me a tragic figure I can write about. This would be the guy. You can see that they called the right field Canigliaro's corner for a little while because he played right field. That was when they were going through the renovations. Rico Petrocelli was the shortstop on the '67 team and the third baseman on the '75 team. If you want to win a trivia question, this is it. Because Rico and Yastrzemski were the only guys that actually played in the '67 and '75 World Series, on the pennant winners. They were on both teams. But if you ask the question, what 3 players started the 1975 season on the Red Sox team? It's Rico, it's Yaz, and it's Tony Canigliaro. But Tony was gone by May. Tony Canigliaro, again, I mean, Rico Best, basically a tremendous team player. The Red Sox had acquired Louis Aparicio in the early 70s, who was a Hall of Fame shortstop. And Rico said, I'll move over. He's better than me over there. And Rico moved over to third. And he was on the 75 team. In 1969, he was the first American League shortstop to hit 40 home runs in a season. And in that year, his WAR was 10.0 on the dot. And he was the fourth Red Sox player to achieve, everyday player to achieve that mark. And I said to him, I've met him, we're involved in the same golf tournament together down in Florida. And I told him, I said, because he didn't know what WAR was. He said, what is it? I said, so I explained it to him, and I said, and really, Rico, I'm going to tell you, if this were today, I said, in 1969, you would have been the MVP. And he kind of went, really? I said, yeah. And then I told him, I said, there was Yaz, Williams, and Tris Speaker. And the only guys who had everyday players who had a WAR higher than 10. So he kind of liked that. He's a really nice guy. A really nice guy. But anyway, only him and Yaz. And he's an all-time favorite. In 1972, this guy arrives, Carlton Fisk. We all might have heard of him. He arrived with a bang. He grew up in New Hampshire. Born in Vermont, grew up in New Hampshire. Growing up, he wanted to play for the Boston Celtics. That was his goal. He wanted to be a power forward for the Boston Celtics. He had to settle for playing for the Red Sox. This is the rebirth of the rivalry. It happened here. Thurman Munson was the American League Rookie of the Year, Yankee catcher in 1970. Fisk was the American League Rookie of the Year, 1972, Red Sox catcher. They were very similar. They were hard-nosed. They were tough. They fight. And actually, in 72 as a rookie, Fisk called out two veterans of the team, Yastrzemski and Reggie Smith, in an article in Sports Illustrated. He said, we're not getting the leadership here we should be getting from guys who have been here for a while. Caused a little bit of controversy, but he wasn't wrong. So this marked the rebirth. This is a great shot that was on the 74 yearbook, and that led to one of the great Red Sox-Yankee fights ever. It tumbled over, and then whoop, everybody came out to hug each other, if you will. Yes. Wanted to feel the love. 1975, these two guys arrived. The best rookie tandem in history. Both of them were rookies. Freddie Lynn became the first player in baseball history to win the Rookie of the Year and MVP award in the same season. Only one other guy has done it. Ichiro did it when he arrived on the scene. And Jim Rice would go on to the Hall of Fame. If you said at this time, their first year, pick one to go in the Hall of Fame, you would have chosen Lynn. Lynn had a great career. Lynn said himself, worst thing I ever did was leave Fenway Park. He was tailor-made, left-handed hitter, tailor-made for hitting in that park, taking the ball off the left field wall. He was a tremendous hitter. Might be the most talented guy that's ever put on a uniform. The game almost came too easy to him. But he had a very nice career, and he's a very, very good guy. And this guy was just mashing. And we'll talk about him again when we get to 1978, which is coming up. We all know El Tiante, Louis Tiant, the greatest pitcher not in the Hall of Fame, and I don't understand why. He made his debut in 1964 with the Indians against the Yankees, struck out 11 of them, and shut them out in his first big league game in 1964. In 1968, there was a guy for the Tigers by the name of Denny McLean who won 31 games, the last pitcher to win 30 games in a season. And if it were not for him, he would have won the Cy Young Award. He was outstanding in 68. He was a flamethrower, hurt his arm. The Red Sox literally took him off the scrap heap. He had been the Twins, the Indians traded him to the Twins. The Twins released him in the last day of spring training. And then he went to the minor leagues. They just released him outright. The Red Sox signed him, and they put him in the minor leagues. And he really was, come up in 71, he really didn't do all that well at the end of the season. And then but Darryl Johnson said, I think he can still pitch. Well, he sure could. And he changed, talk about changing the culture. I mean, this guy became one of the most popular players, and still to this day is one of the most popular players that has ever won the uniform. His last game was in 1978. 1975, he won the Babe Ruth Award from the New York Sports Writers. They call it the Babe Ruth Award. They give the MVP of the World Series. The New York writers do it on their own. And they gave it, although Pete Rose won the national award for the MVP of that series, the New York Sports Writers gave it to Tiant because of his unbelievable performance in that. 1978, the Red Sox, They had to win the last game yet to get into another playoff game, and he shut out the Toronto Blue Jays 2-0 at Fenway, and that was his last game. The following year, he was a free agent, and he was signed by the Yankees. Still, it's hard for me to say that. In 1975, Yaz was elevated to sainthood at Fenway Park. People were kind of on him because he could never duplicate 1967. Nobody could. It was crazy. But he had back-to-back 40 home run seasons. He still was a good player, but he wasn't what he was in 67. So he, in 1975, he was playing first base and DHing most of the time, and then Jimmy Rice was playing in left field. And on September 21st, Vern Rule, the Detroit Tigers, hit Jim Rice on the wrist with a fastball and broke his wrist. So Jim Rice was now out for the rest of the year. So the old man, Yaz at this point was 36 years old, went back to left field. Well, when he went back to left field, then they made the playoffs. They were playing against, in those days there was just, basically there was an East and West division, so you had a 3 out of 5 game series to decide who was going to go into the World Series. The Red Sox were playing the Oakland A's. The Oakland A's had won the World Series in 72, 73, and 74. So they were good. This was Reggie Jackson and all those, as Jim Woods used to call them, the mustachioed marauders of Charlie Finley, because they all wore mustaches, which was really, that was kind of cool. But anyway, Yaz went back to left field. In the American League Championship Series, he had 455 with a home run and 2 RBIs, made an unbelievable play in left field on Reggie Jackson. Jackson hits a ball into the gap. It was in the third and deciding game. Yaz cut it off, planted, and threw to second base, and Jackson was thrown out at second base. And Yaz, as he's running by him, Jackson's kind of getting up and dusting himself off, and all Yaz said to him was, without breaking stride, "Reggie, you should know better." And he just kept on going. But he hit in the 75 World Series, he hit .310 after hitting .452 in the 1967 World Series. But it was all of this in 1975 that ultimately led to him becoming a god, if you will, as they used to call him. Sport Magazine called him the patron saint of the Red Sox. 75 World Series, Game 6, probably the most. They weren't supposed to win. The Big Red Machine had won 108 games. The Red Sox really weren't even supposed to get to the World Series, let alone win the World Series. Tion shut out the Reds in the first game. The Red Sox go up. They go down 3-1. They win Game 5, and now it comes to Game 6. And they're losing in the 8th inning, 6-3. I can remember sitting, looking at my brother, saying, "They just didn't have the horses. It's too bad. It was fun, but they're just not good enough." Then the 8th inning opens up, and Rico gets on, Lynn gets on, Rico gets on, and Bernie Cabo comes out of the dugout. Bernie Cabo, who was a space cadet, ultimate space cadet, had a lot of substance abuse issues. He steps up to the plate, almost strikes out, and fouls a ball off that literally is almost in Johnny Bench's glove, and he just kind of sees that it's going to be a strike, and he gets his bat on the ball, fouls it off, and on the next pitch hits a rocket into the center field bleachers to make it 6-6. The place goes crazy. Insane crazy. And so now everybody talks about Fisk's home run in 1975. I will tell you, sitting there and experiencing it, this one was better. Not to demean what Fisk did, but when he did, because you were here and it was over, and then it wasn't. And you really thought they're going to win. It's just a matter of when and how. On the bottom of the 9th inning, they get the bases loaded, 1 out. Freddie Lynn flies out to left field. George Foster throws out Denny Doyle, tagging up, so they don't win. In the 11th inning, the Reds have 2 guys on, 1 out. Joe Morgan hits a rocket over Dwight Evans' head. Looks like it's going in the stands in right field for a 3-run homer. Evans grabs it, makes the catch, pulls it out, guns the ball to first base where Rick Burleson, the shortstop's covering to get a double play. So the Sox almost won at the 10th. The Reds almost won at the 11th. Leading off the 12th inning, Fisk and Lynn come out of the dugout. Fisk is up first, and then Lynn's up, and Fisk looks at him and he goes, "Freddie, I'm going to hit one off the wall, knock me in." Lynn says, "I'm in. I got a good plan." Well, he didn't hit one off the wall, he hit one off the foul pole. And that's that famous photograph, you know, where you see him waving the thing fair. They now call it the Fisk Pole. They've named it officially the Fisk Pole at Fenway Park. And actually, that was crazy. They were playing the Alleluia Chorus. They were playing that at Fenway Park. We didn't leave the park for a half hour, 45 minutes. People just were standing there, just chanting and screaming. Now they're going to Game 7. Well, they lost Game 7, and they were ahead. Again, talk about the curse. They were ahead 3-0 into the 7th inning, and then they ended up losing it on a little bloop single in the 9th inning, and again to the curse. And Carlton Fisk had the greatest line ever. He said, "Hey, we won that World Series 3-4." That's the way he talks about it. And the Reds, guys who play for the Reds, they don't like this team. This game was called by the Major League Baseball Network the greatest baseball game ever to be on television. And they did a whole the top like 50 of them. And this was number one. It was absolutely remarkable. And until 2004, this was the Red Sox signature moment of the last 100 years.
So, in lack of time,
Yeah.
are you going to bring us up to? We won't have time. So,
Where are we? How much time we got?
well, a
Tell me
half
how much
hour ago.
Oh,
Let's keep.
you throwing me out again?
No, I have
I
to.
understand. Okay, good.
No. Where do you want to go with it?
Okay, keep going. I'll tell you where to go.
Okay.
Okay, 78 playoff game. Go ahead. This was the one-game playoff game. They won the last game of the season, and then they lost. But that was Yaz. Rice was the MVP. Go ahead. Yaz, 3,000th hit in 1979. Became the first American League player 3,400 homers. We can go quick. Wade Boggs appeared. Yaz said goodbye. 1983. Boggs' number is retired. Go ahead. To retired numbers began in 1984. Williams' number had been retired. Nobody wore it. But they actually didn't make it official in putting up of the facade. That's when the facade was bought. Joe Cronin and Joe Cronin died about 3 weeks after this, actually. 1986, you know that guy? Roger Clemens, you might have heard of him. Interesting little note. Roger Clemens left the Red Sox. Nobody has worn number 21 since Roger Clemens left the Red Sox. Nobody. So it's unofficially retired. So I'm going to predict to you now the day will come when Roger Clemens' number will be up on the facade. Go ahead. 1988. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick. This is Josh Sinibaldi, his first game, 1988. Bobby Doerr's number was retired. Go ahead, I'm going to just tell you a quick story about the Ted Williams statue. Then Yaz's number was in 89. Keep going, just blow right through this. Fisk, under the 9418. Fisk would be the next number up here. It went from 1989 until 2000 when they put the number 27 up there. That's him with the White Sox. I don't like that black and white uniform, but he was pretty good. The 90s, Mo Vaughn, some guy named Nomar, we all heard of. One of the best right-handed hitters they ever had, without question. 1997, great trade. Dan Duquette got these two guys, Jason Varitek and Derek Lowe, for a guy named Heathcliff Slocum, who you never heard of. And that was a good trade. One of their best trades. This was their best trade. They got Pedro Martinez for Tony Amos Jr. and a guy named Carl Pavano. And we got Pedro, and it was all good with him. Maybe the most dominant pitcher in the history of the game. But that's for a debate now. 1999, the All-Star game, Ted Williams, his last trip to Fenway Park. All the players came. I mean, it was, if you ever watch, Google that. I mean, you can YouTube that and watch Ted Williams. Just Google 1999 All-Star game, Ted Williams. You'll watch 9 minutes of a video that'll bring tears to your eyes. It was his last appearance at Fenway Park. He was just about blind. He couldn't see, and he would be dead in 3 years, which is what's coming up next. And then Fenway turned into a chapel. I mean, literally, they had a memorial service for Ted Williams there. And when he passed away, they put the 9 in, and people came. I don't know, about 30,000 people walked throughout the course of the day. It was pretty cool. And then comes 2004. And then real quick, I'll tell you the story. 2003, the curse. This was madness, 2003, 2004, the height of the Yankee rivalry, which I hope is about to resume. I hope it's about to happen again, because both teams are very good. And I love that when Varitek just stuffed A-Rod's face with a glove. It's one of my favorite baseball pictures ever. Now this is the guy, this is the quick story that you're going to get. This guy's name is Frank Tallarico. He lived in Venice, Florida with me. I had known him for a number of years. I just saw him around town. Sweet, sweet, sweet old man. One day he knocks on my door and he said, Ray, I need you to help me come to know Ted Williams. I said, Frank, Ted's dead. It's going to be tough to do. He said, no, 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 no. I'm a sculptor. He said, I'm a sculptor, and I've been commissioned to do a statue of Ted Williams for the Ted Williams Museum, which was in Citrus County. So I spent hours with Frank, showed him photographs, told him Ted Williams stories about the Jimmy Fund, and how I said he's responsible for about $5 million on his own Jimmy Fund. I said he was cantankerous. He never tipped his hat. He had all this going on, but yet when it came to the Jimmy Fund kids, he had a huge, huge heart. So Frank took the idea of Ted not tipping his cap, but he said he would give it to a kid from the Jimmy Fund. So in his mind, this is what he put together for the Jimmy Fund what they call the Jimmy Fund statue. So we did that. I went with him. This is at the Ted Williams Museum in Citrus County, and he took me along. And he said, this is my consultant. I never got any money, but I didn't care, because I was just on the ride with Frank. So we did all that. This is Rico, Louis Tion, and Dominic DiMaggio. And I introduced Frank because they dedicated the statue that same day. Next one, Sharon, this is good. So in the middle of him making the statue, the Red Sox now, Mamonino boss says, I want to put one of Ted outside on the streets of Boston. So they then send people, Janet Marie Smith and a guy that worked with her in her office came down to Florida and met with another guy named Billy Klaus, because Billy Klaus played with the Red Sox and they wanted to make sure that the face looks enough like Ted. Okay? Well, in the middle of all this is called a maquette. That's a little thing that they make. I learned a lot about making statues too, by the way, sculptors. But so Frank had made this is his maquette. In the middle of it all, he calls me and he said, Ray, do you think Josh could help me? I said, what do you need, Frank? He said, I need him in a baseball uniform that's a little too big for him. He said, and I want him to come over. I want to take photographs of him. So I said, sure. So this is my son at 18 years of age, about 2002. And Frank gave me all the pictures. I got about a dozen pictures of my son Josh, who actually posed for the Ted Williams statue that's out there. So now they ended up moving it because when Ted died, Citrus Hills is literally the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's 25 miles from this where, 25 miles from that where, and it is absolutely nowhere. But when Ted was alive, everybody came. Everybody came to when they did the Ted hit his Hall of Fame. When Ted died, nobody came, so they had to shut it down. And they moved it, and it's now at the Tropicana Field inside St. Pete, where the Rays play. But anyway, next I think we have the dedication of So this is in the Foundry in Sarasota. So I get to watch this thing being put together. This is Frank with Billy Klaus, and this is Frank and his wife. This is the dedication at the Ted Williams Museum. But anyway, you can go real quick now. That's Frank actually predicted the curse was over. This is no lie. April 2004. He told those news people who are from Rhode Island, the curse is over. Ted's going to chase it away. This is April 2004. The Red Sox win the World Series. Be advised, Frank didn't know a baseball from a grapefruit. He had a great heart, though. He was a great, great guy. There's Epstein. Kurt Schilling arrives for 2004. Dave Roberts steals the base. So he had played 45 games with the Red Sox. Millar walked to start it off. He played 45 games with the Red Sox, and his feet are there forever, and he can't buy a meal in Boston. Every time he goes back, somebody's going to pick up the tab for him. He stole the base. That basically turned the whole 2004 playoffs around. They were down 3 games to none, and they were losing in the 9th inning, and then Dave Roberts steals second base, and up comes David Ortiz and says, look out! Get on my shoulders. Hits the home run to win game 4, singles to win game 5. Then you have Schilling again in New York, and then you have Pedro, and then you have Madness. Madness. Yes. Okay, Big Papi. And then this is opening day 2005, when the curse is finally gone forever. And then next we have trade. We get real quick. Manny Ramirez, Mike Lowell, David Ortiz taken in 2007, 2004 World Series MVP, 2007 World Series MVP, 2013 World Series MVP. You won't find a photograph that's got the 3 of them together on the field. This little lady let me do this. I loved it. God bless her. That had to hurt like crazy. But her name, she allowed me to use this photo. She was a devoted fan in 2004, 2007. She said all the girls that she hung out with at college, they were freshmen in 2004 and they were juniors in 2007 or seniors. So they were in Boston, and so they all went and marked themselves for life.
Wow.
The day will come when she'll wish she didn't do that. 2008, they lost in Tampa Bay in the 7th game of the American League Championship Series. I was at that game, broke my heart. Pedroia homered in the first, and they lost 2-1. David Price beat them, who's now toiling for us, and he better be better than he was last year. Number 14, the night right. This was taken about 5 minutes. A friend of mine took that. That's the same woman who took the cover photo. And she also grabbed Johnny Pesky's ring. Johnny Pesky unveiled Rice because his number was retired previous. That's how they were doing it. And that's the 2007 championship ring on Johnny Pesky's finger. She's got about 14 photos that she let me use in here. She's got a great eye. That's one of them. This is the 100th birthday of Fenway Park, 2012, where 216 guys came with just the music from Field of Dreams playing. And they appeared from all over the place. They come out of this door, then they come out of the dugout. No names, no nothing. Oh no, they would put the names up on the board, but no announcements. And all the guys, Bryce was first one out, Yaz was the last one out. And then these guys came out. This was Wakefield and Veritek had retired the year before. Poppy was still playing. That's the 1912 uniform. And this is Bobby Dorr and Johnny Pesky that they wheeled out to the center of the diamond. This is the guy that did the Yaz statue. He's making the maquette of my photograph. No, it's actually Peely's photograph, but for our purposes, it's mine. And that's the teammate statue. You see, they wanted this, but he did this. And if you ever look at it, he's got them facing each other. He said he thought it was more of a team deal, that they were actually facing each other. Yaz Day, 2013, they dedicated Yaz statue. Again, there's the photo. And he got to choose that one because he had done the other one such a good job. And he decided that he wanted the doffing of the cap because it connected him more to the fans. 2013, the marathon bombing that led to the World Series champions. Again, it was a chapel. It was a memorial service for the marathon victims of the marathon bombing a week afterwards, in which David Ortiz became the only guy to actually probably drop the F-bomb in church and get away with it. I mean, that's essentially what happened. I mean, this literally was. I mean, it was really very much like a church service. But anyway.
Were you at that?
No, I was watching it on TV. Yeah. I have to say I was disappointed that he did that. It was disappointing to me. But this is just a couple of photos. This is Gus's first game. It's with his grandfather and his uncle. And this is just a great photo that I loved. That I love the reflection in the eye of the field that you can kind of see there. He's about a 11-year-old kid from Michigan that came to make a pilgrimage. Big Poppy's last weekend, and I loved it. As Rice and Yaz came out there for the last game, he's hugging Yaz there, and Poppy did one of these. Basically letting the fans know that he understood that he's entered into elite company. Good stuff. This is the night of his retirement in 2017, not his retirement, of his number being retired. And this is the white banner. The white banner is a temporary banner. When they win the Eastern Division Championship, that goes up. But it only stays for a short period of time. They will either be out, or if they win the American League pennant, the banner changes to blue. They win the World Series, it changes to red. They don't go any further, they just take it down. So you won't see this hanging up there on Yawkey Way. So it's kind of a temporary thing. And this is the fourth generation Red Sox fan. This is his mom. His first visit to Fenway Park came last year. His great-grandfather never saw the Red Sox win. Saw them, his great-grandfather was born in 21 and died in 98, so he never saw, as he was saying when he was dying, I'm running out of next year's. And he did, but he's wearing number 50, and it's kind of appropriate. That's Mookie Betts' number. His mom's nickname was Mookie. So he made his first trip to Fenway last summer. And of course the foam finger, because Fenway always will be number one in our hearts.
Oh, that's good.
Sorry I kept this so late. You're going to have to schedule me longer. I know when I get going, this is not a good...
I see everyone sitting here.
Yeah, this is